People of all ages have looked towards the sky in awe and admiration, whether it's for religious or personal reasons. Cultures across the world have always attributed incredible significance to the sky, because it hosts the sun, the moon, the stars, and all other manner of incredible things. The sky, however, is also home to many strange things that often fall down to the earth. You wouldn't believe some of the things people have found after observing them falling from above. Here are 10 of the strangest things that have been seen falling from the sky. Number 10. Frogs. When you look up towards the sky, it's a fair thing to assume that you won't be seeing any frogs raining down towards your face. That is exactly what has happened in multiple scenarios, however, where there seemed to be a storm of frogs falling from the sky. People naturally wondered what was happening and eventually managed to figure it out. Usually when this happens, it is because a large herd of freshly turned frogs have just climbed out of a pond, meaning there are a lot in one area. They are then swept up by a strong wind and carried off towards another location, where they rain down on the ground. Because frogs weigh so little, they generally survive the impact. Even knowing the reason, it would still be incredibly strange to have frogs falling down on the ground when you expected a rainstorm. Number 9. Hundreds of birds. It was a perfectly calm day within a small section of a city in Mexico, and everything was seemingly normal. People were going about their day, talking and laughing and hugging each other, when suddenly the sky seemed to dump hundreds of birds down onto the ground. It was a traumatizing experience both for the people and for the birds, because it seems like many of the birds lost their lives in the fall. Many people have tried to explain what happened, but realistically, there is very little that people have actually figured out about the phenomenon. All that scientists can really guess is that there were chemicals in the air, and the birds were temporarily stunned when they flew into the vaporous cloud of fumes. Hopefully, this shows people just how serious pollution is, even within more rural countries, and that human activity has a real impact on wildlife. Number 8. Boiled bats. Bats are a relatively common fear for many people in the world, and who can blame them? They're generally quite creepy little animals, though nothing is as creepy as dead bats falling from the sky. That's what happened in Australia, when a large swath of dead bats began to fall from the sky towards the ground. Nobody knew why this was happening at the time, but the bats seemed relatively undamaged in terms of their physical appearance. People couldn't figure out why they were dying until samples were taken by scientists. As it turns out, the massive heat wave permeating Australia at that time had effectively boiled the bats alive, cooking their insides and killing them as they tried to fly towards somewhere cooler. It's a sad story, and hopefully it sheds some light on how bad the heat wave was in the country. Number 7. Red rain. When it began to rain late in the day in rural India, people didn't really pay it much mind. Rain was incredibly common in the region, and there had actually been a storm forecasted for that very day. When they realized that the rain was a different color than normal, however, people began to worry. The rain looked like blood, which was worrying in the very religious sections of India. People didn't know what was causing it or why it was happening, and this generally causes panic. The issue is that people still don't know why it happened, and conspiracies have flourished. Many people believe that it was some sort of space virus falling to Earth to infect everybody. The people seem to be okay for now, but nobody really knows what it was or why the sky ran red that day. Number 6. Locusts. Locusts may not fall from the sky, but the way that they gather in a sort of storm certainly makes it feel that way. Locusts are generally solo creatures early on in their lifespans, but when they start to get together in a swarm, it activates some odd part of the bug's brain that tells it to join in. This often results in swarms that are thousands large, sometimes even tens of thousands. There is a reason that a plague of locusts is often described as biblical. The sound they make is terrifying and invasive, and the way they pummel through locations and tear apart crops is frightening. Whenever a swarm of locusts comes through, it makes sense to hide as soon as possible. Number 5. Frozen iguanas. Although they admittedly don't fall from high in the sky, Florida's iguanas are certainly an odd phenomenon worth talking about. They live in the trees of the southernmost Florida and are generally just treated as minor nuisances. When the winter comes in, however, and gets to around freezing temperatures, the iguana's nervous systems slow down. Eventually, it gets to a point where their bodies effectively shut down and they lose their grip on the trees and fall to the ground. When this occurs, people either collect them or leave them be, where they will eventually warm up and continue to move across the ground or back up into the trees. This odd phenomenon has become a sort of joke among many natives in the area, with many warning others to stay out from underneath the trees, or they may be high. Number 4. Purple rain. Citizens in a small town in a Las Vegas valley weren't expecting anything more than a routine storm as clouds gathered above their houses one morning. But that expectation was immediately dashed when the rain coming down from above acted more like a goop. The substance falling from the sky was purple in color and incredibly sticky, sticking to things like cars, lawn chairs, stairs, and other such items, and being nearly impossible to scrape off. People didn't understand what the substance was and why it was raining down from the heavens, but many feared that it was some sort of divine intervention. This seems to have been a one-time thing, and scientists haven't released any information or findings on why it occurred or what the strange substance was. Number 3. Fish. In a similar vein to frogs raining from the sky, people don't often expect to look up and see fish raining down upon them. Interestingly enough, this is actually more common than many people would like to believe. Fish can end up in the sky in a multitude of ways, from being swept up in a storm over sea to a large flock of birds, all catching from a school of fish. The end result is the same. Many fish falling down upon a city or a town, and the residents being confused about why it is happening. This actually presents a far larger problem than the frogs, because the fish are going to die on land while the frogs survive. This leads to a massive cleanup job for the city's cleanup crew, which is never a fun time. Number 2. Space station. Space stations are incredibly large, incredibly expensive things to make, and therefore most countries attempt to utilize them for as long as possible. China had done this for its Tiangong-1 space lab, which was anticipated to operate for 2 years. After considerably longer than expected, however, Beijing lost control of the lab. It was designed to eventually fall back down to Earth and burn up within the atmosphere. Even so, many people felt emotional watching the lab they had dedicated so much of their working life towards, and seeing it burn up in the atmosphere was emotional to them. Luckily, China's space operation is thriving, and there are many other stations and labs to work on. Number 1. Lamprey eels. Lamprey eels are quite rare to see, even when one is looking for them, which means that seeing them rain from the sky is an even rare phenomenon. This, however, was exactly what happened in Alaska one morning, when lampreys were discovered to be falling down onto the roads and sidewalks of a small town. This is much like many of the other entries, where they were swept up by a storm. But the strange part is that generally, lamprey eels are fairly solitary. They also belong much deeper in the ocean than what can generally be picked up by a storm. So the question arose, how did these eels actually fall down upon land? Nobody has been able to figure it out, even all these years later, and the occurrence hasn't happened again since. Which of these things do you think is the strangest? What would you do if one of these fell from the sky into your yard? Tell us in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe so we know what kind of content you love. This allows us to make bigger, better videos for you to enjoy. Smash that bell icon so you're always alerted to new videos, and we'll see you in the next one.